Father God, you know my every thought, and you know my ways, the path on which I walk, and you know me better than I know myself, and you've known me longer than anyone else. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, and I can't even understand it. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. I can't even comprehend it, but I know you see. Oh, this I know you see. Oh, I could walk where men may never tread, or plunge the depths where I could make my bed. But I never went hide and seek. You're so good at finding me, only lost in the mystery of the depth of your love for me. Just as knowledge is too wonderful for me, and I can't even understand it. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. Oh, and I can't even comprehend it, but I know you see. Oh, this I know you see. And even where my world is shaking, Lord, your hand will hold me still. Even where my world is shaking, your hand will hold me still. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made.
Hello and welcome to tonight's Theology Chat with Chumpy. Just a reminder what this is. We have our sermon on Sunday morning, and then Tuesday I come along and I try to define some of the theological concepts that are behind what Pastor Melissa has been preaching about on Sunday morning. I try and break down some of the big words, some of the big concepts into, well, we've been talking about meat, so I try and take the big chunks of meat and break them down into bite-sized chunks. That. And the other thing that we're trying to do is answer any questions that come up from the sermon. And along that line, if there's any questions that you think of, feel free to put those in the comments. I'll try and answer those if I see them while I'm doing this. If not, maybe I'll send you a message later, try and give some thoughts on that if I don't get that in the video. I'm going to be honest, I had a hard time putting this together this week because I have been extremely sad and extremely angry at a lot of the things that I've been seeing online about what's going on in our country right now. So my apologies beforehand if this is not as well put together as the others. So with that said, let's jump in. So Pastor Melissa on Sundays was talking about obedience. And honestly, obedience is a pretty simple concept, so I don't feel like there's a whole lot that we need to break down. Stuff here. Yeah, there's not a whole lot to define there. It's compliance with an order, request, law, or submission to another's authority. I just pulled that off the dictionary. I mean, that's really what obedience is. You know what you're supposed to do, and you do it. So God tells us how we're to live, and we just do it, right? Sure. And every child does exactly what their parents tell them to do. Right. For us, obedience really is where the rubber meets the road as far as our faith. We said before that it's important to be in the Bible and be learning how it is that God wants us to be living. We can't be obedient to something if we don't know what it is, right? So we need to be in there and find out what God wants for our lives, how He wants us to live. So we've said that before. And why is that important? Well, because He expects us to live that way. He expects us to be people that bear His image, be people that look like Jesus in our world. He expects us to be obedient. That's pretty simple. Jesus told us, He said in John 14:15, let me pull that one up. Don't have that one. But in John 14:15, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commands. If you love me, keep my commands. Obviously, the inverse, if you don't keep my commands, I guess you don't love me. He expects obedience. And it didn't just start with Jesus. You go all the way back to, go all the way back to the garden. Don't eat from that one tree. I expect obedience, right? God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, right? And what did He tell them? Well, let's go to Jeremiah chapter 7. It says, for when I brought your ancestors out of Egypt and spoke to them, I did not just give them commands about burnt offerings and sacrifices, but I gave them this command: obey me, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Walk in obedience to all that I command you, that it might go well with you. That's Jeremiah chapter 7. He's calling back to when Israelites were brought out of Egypt. They were given their freedom, and they were given they were created as a people who were previously slaves. God makes it clear that if we love Him, if we intend to be the people of God, then we are to obey His commands. It is expected. Jesus says in Luke chapter 6, He says, He's talking to the people. I don't have this one to pull up either. He says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and then don't do what I say? Pastor Melissa said this before. No Lord, no comma Lord, is an oxymoron. You can't claim that He is Lord and then say no. Either He's your Lord and you're going to be obedient, or you're in rebellion. It's kind of, you can't have it both ways. And here's the thing. I know there's a lot of people, it seems, that look good, but then they go and they go on the what they don't know won't hurt them policy. But here's the thing: God knows what you do, what you say, and what you think. And you may be able to fool me. You may be even able to you may be able to fool people around you. You may be able to even fool yourself into thinking that you are doing things perfectly fine. But God knows your deeds. He knows your words. He knows your heart better than you do. And so when some people that are doing some shady stuff, they say, only God can judge me. I think, well, yeah, but most of the time when I see people saying that, I think I would be a lot more concerned about that if I were you. Because let's be honest here, God sees through all of the BS that you try and pile on top of your sin and on your top of your disobedience and mine. Like I do the same thing. I sometimes talk myself, justify things to myself, and then later on I'm like, oh, that was dumb. Why did I do that? But you cannot think that you're going to try and fool God, get away with it, and but here's the thing. You can go through the motions of pretending to follow Jesus, but if you are not living out his commands, then who are you really saying is God? It's a matter of who God is in our life. Is it actually God? And so I should obey his commands? Or do I think that I know better? And so even though I know God says this, I can still be a Christian and live how I want. God says that's not how this works. All through the Old Testament, the Israelites tried to get away with that. They tried to do their own thing. They tried to do it their way. And here's what God had to say about it. Spoiler alert, he was not a fan. In Isaiah chapter 1, let me pull that up. Yep. In Isaiah chapter 1, stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moons, Sabbaths, and convocations. This is God speaking, by the way. I cannot bear your worthless assemblies. Your new moon feasts and your appointed festivals I hate with all my being. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands in prayer, I hide my eyes from you. Even when you offer many prayers, I am not listening. Your hands are full of blood. Wash them and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. He's saying, I've been telling you guys all along, this is how you are to be as a people, and you have gone off and done it your own way. You have not been obedient to what I've been telling you to be as a people. And I am not happy about it. Put it lightly, is what he's saying. But that obviously is not the only place you're going to find that. In fact, if you look throughout the whole Old Testament, it's case after case after case of Israel thinking, oh, we can do things our own way. We can do things and not be obedient to God. And then God coming in and saying, no, remember, I'm God, not you. And having basically to lay the smackdown on him. In Amos chapter 5, Amos was a prophet. What the prophets were the people that God gave this message to the prophets to give to the people. A lot of the times it was correction. And so the prophets were not very well liked by the leadership in Israel because they were the ones correcting them. They were the ones calling them out on the stuff that they were trying to get away with. And so Amos goes and he says, speaking for God here, he says, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Again, God is saying, look, I told you how I want you to be as a people, and you're not obeying. You are not being the people that I've called you to be. And I've had it, is what God is saying here. And so even when they're going through the motions, they're doing the right things. They're doing these festivals. They're doing these songs of worship and stuff. God says, it's detestable to me because you guys do this. I think it's in Isaiah. He says, you praise me out of one corner of your mouth and you turn it around and you curse people out of the other. It's not obeying the way that God wants us to live. And that is important to God. And it should be important to us. Why? Because obedience is a choice for each and every person who claims to be a follower of Christ, that every day you wake up, you have to decide, am I going to pick up my cross and follow Jesus? Or am I going to be God today? That's the choice. We can either pick up our cross and obey and do what God wants us to be doing, or we take the throne, our ego gets in the way, our ego takes control, and we proclaim ourselves to be God because we know better. That's not really a place that you want to be. Because if you know that God commands you to do something and you don't do it, or God commands you not to do something and you do it, that is called sin. And sin is literally the thing that breaks the relationship between you and God. And so when we do that, we break our relationship with God. Like I said before, we put ourselves in rebellion against God. Not a place that we want to be. And so obedience is important. Obedience to God's commands and teachings is an indicator that you're saying that God is God and not me. You're not only saying it, but you're believing it and you're acting on it. There have been, there are, and there will be people that say they believe one thing and then do another. But that ultimately is not going to end well for them. Like I said before, God sees through all of their stuff, and he will not, you can't fool God. Ask Ananias and Sapphira about that someday. They'll tell you. Put short, God expects obedience. If we call ourselves Christians, if we call ourselves followers of Jesus, and we say Jesus is Lord, he expects us to act like it. He expects us to be obedient. Now, God realizes, he knows we're not perfect, and so he gives us grace. But he also holds us accountable for how we live. And I think I said this a week or two ago. God expects us, he expects obedience. But if we are putting in an effort and we slip up and we realize what we're doing and we come to him and say, God, I'm sorry, I messed up. I'm trying. He gives us grace. He is abounding in grace. He is abounding in patience. But when we try to play him, we will lose. That's as simple as it is. I think about as a parent, like sometimes you know what your kids did, and they're trying to tell you another story, and you're sitting there listening to them, like, sure, and you're waiting for them to eventually come along and say, yeah, you know, I did that. And then you can say, okay, let's move on from there. But until that point, they're denying it to you, and it's like, that's not what God wants for us. He wants us to obey when we mess up. Okay, he wants us to try, and then try again, and keep trying until we get it. And if we're doing that, he gives us the grace, but he does hold us accountable. It's good for us as Christians to have people around us that will hold us accountable. That's one of the great things about, I talk about the harbor a lot, obviously, because we're the harbor, but that's one of the great things about the 12-step groups is they get together, and that's kind of a built-in accountability. One of the things that we are to be as the church is accountability for one another. So when we see each other kind of going down a a bad path, so to speak, we can come along and say, hey, let's talk about this. There's a verse that says, speak the truth in love. And so we come alongside someone and say, hey, I'm a little concerned about what's going on here. And so we can take that and take that in love, and we can benefit from that. There's another verse that says iron sharpens iron. So if I have somebody who's holding me accountable and I'm holding them accountable, we do a lot better, because otherwise we're just left to our own devices, and we run rampant, and we run way far off of where God wants us. That is not a good place to be. So long story short, it really was a simple one this week. God expects obedience out of us. And so when we read through the Bible, we see how he wants us to live. He expects us to live that way. And when we are not, we are being disobedient. We are being rebellious against God. That's the long and short of it. Not a whole lot of big words this week. Not a whole lot of big concepts to explain. But that's about it. So I'll talk to y'all next week. I forget what next week's sermon is. I should have my little list up here when our little plan for what we're talking about, so I can remember to say that. But I'll see y'all Sunday, and then talk to y'all again Tuesday. Bye bye.